The one and only Local 10 News starts right now.
Good evening. Off the top at 6 tonight, sad new details about the family tragedy in Doral. A mother and her 2 young daughters found stabbed to death.
Tonight, deputies are revealing that the girls' father killed them all before taking his own life.
3 people lived in that house, a mother and her 2 little girls. By Tuesday night, all 3 were gone, and the one person who was supposed to protect them is the reason why. Melanie Heyer was building something real, a career, a community, a life for herself and her daughters that was full and bright and moving forward. Savannah was 11 years old, sharp as a tack, the kind of kid whose teacher hadn't been able to bring herself to delete her from the calendar, even days after her death. Sienna was 8. People who knew her said she moved through every room like a little storm, full of life, full of noise, full of joy. These were not background characters. These were real people with real futures. And they were taken, all 3 of them, in a single night, inside the home they shared, by the man who was the father of those girls. His name was Ryan Whitten. In every home, behind every closed door, there's a story waiting to be uncovered. Welcome to Dark Whispers, where we dive deep into the hidden truths of domestic crime and the relationships that turn deadly. If you're drawn to real stories, powerful insights, and the shadows most people avoid, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and step into the whispers they never wanted you to hear. Doral, Florida, a suburb just west of Miami, is the kind of place where families put down roots, gated communities, good schools, neighbors who wave at each other in the morning. It is the kind of place where people move when they are trying to build something stable. Melanie Heyer had built exactly that. She was a real estate agent, which means she knew this area. She knew the streets, the neighborhoods, the value of a good home. She was also deeply woven into the fabric of South Florida's nonprofit community. One organization in particular, the Lucy Project, had become a real part of her life. The Lucy Project worked with kids on literacy, and Melanie did not just write a check and call it a day. She showed up. She brought her energy, and she brought her daughters with her. Savannah had dyslexia. For a lot of kids, a reading challenge that size can feel like a wall, but Savannah attacked it. Her instructor, Virginia Talley, would later remember the spelling tiles. Simple educational tools that clicked for Savannah in a way that changed everything. She got 100% on a spelling test after working with those tiles. 100%. Her instructor was so proud she could barely speak about it after Savannah was gone. Sienna was younger, louder, and impossible to ignore. People who loved her called her the Tasmanian devil, always moving, always in the middle of everything. And Savannah, her big sister, was described as a ray of sunshine. 2 completely different personalities, both of them magnetic. Their mother was the thread that held it all together. Melanie raised these girls with intention. She was present at their programs, present in their school life, present in the community. The kind of mother who enrolled her kids in enrichment programs, not because it looked good, but because she genuinely wanted them to grow. The kind of woman who showed up for other people's children the same way she showed up for her own. Ryan Whitten was the father of Savannah and Sienna. Beyond that, investigators and the people around this family are still trying to understand what happened inside that household and what brought it to such a violent end. What we know is that at some point, something between Ryan Whitten and Melanie Heyer broke. Whether it broke slowly or all at once, the people who loved this family are the ones left holding that question, and they may never get a clean answer. The people around Melanie and her daughters described them with warmth and ease. Nobody who spoke publicly about this family talked about fear. Nobody mentioned a history of calls to the police or visible warning signs that the girls were in danger inside that home. And that is exactly what makes this so hard to process. Because when there is no obvious trail of red flags, when the family that is destroyed looks, from the outside, like a family that was thriving, the grief hits differently. The guilt hits differently. The questions hit differently. You kind of just think, what could you have done? What signs did you not see? That is a question that will follow everyone who loved Melanie, Savannah, and Sienna for the rest of their lives. Friends, neighbors, the woman at the Lucy Project who was still waiting to see Savannah walk through the door for her next session. People who had no reason to suspect that Tuesday night was coming. Investigators who arrived at that Doral Isles home would spend the days after trying to piece together what led Ryan Whitten to make the choice he made. What they found, when they got inside that house, told them everything about what had happened, and nothing about why. The bodies of Melanie, Savannah, and Sienna were all found with stab wounds. All three of them. Ryan Whitten was also found dead. A murder-suicide. The Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office would confirm his name as the person responsible for the deaths of his daughters and their mother before turning the weapon on himself. 3 people who had done nothing wrong. Gone in a single night. Tuesday night started the same way most nights in Doral Isles start. Quiet, residential. The kind of neighborhood where the biggest concern at that hour is whether someone left their sprinklers on too long. People were inside their homes. Doors were closed. And inside one particular house on that street, something was happening that none of the neighbors could see, and none of them could stop. We do not know the exact moment it began. We do not know if there were raised voices first, or if it happened in silence. We do not know if Savannah and Sienna understood what was coming, or if it was over before they had any chance to react. Those details, the ones that would tell us the shape of those final moments, have not been made fully public, and in some ways, that absence is its own kind of heaviness. What we know is the outcome. Melanie Heyer, 30-something, a real estate agent, a mother who spent her free time helping other people's children learn to read, was stabbed to death inside the home she shared with her daughters. Savannah, 11 years old, with her spelling tiles and her 100% test score and a future that her instructor had already mapped out in her calendar, was stabbed to death. Sienna, 8 years old, the little girl who filled every room she walked into, was stabbed to death. Ryan Whitten then took his own life. 4 people entered that home that day. None of them came out alive. When the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office arrived and made that discovery, the community around the Doral Isles neighborhood went into a kind of collective shock that doesn't have a clean word for it. Because this was not a house that people had been watching with concern. This was not a family that had been flagged. This was a home on a normal street, in a normal suburb, where a completely abnormal thing had just happened, and nobody had seen it coming. The girls' bodies were found alongside their mothers, stab wounds on all 3 of them. The medical examiner's work would confirm what the scene already told investigators. This was not an accident. This was not a break-in. This was a man who made a choice, acted on it, and then made sure he would never have to answer for it. That last part, the fact that Ryan Whitten took his own life, is the part that sits with people in the most uncomfortable way. Because there is no trial coming. There is no courtroom moment where someone looks him in the eye and demands an explanation. There is no sentencing. There is no consequence that the law can deliver. The only people left to carry the weight of what happened in that house are the people who loved Melanie, Savannah, and Sienna. And they are carrying a lot. The Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office responded to the Doral Isles home and quickly established that what they were looking at was a murder-suicide. Ryan Whitten was identified as the person responsible for the deaths of Melanie Heyer, Savannah Whitten, and Sienna Whitten. The confirmation of his name came in the days following the discovery, as investigators worked to piece together the full picture of what had happened inside that house, what they were looking for, and what the public is still waiting on, is a motive. That word gets used a lot in cases like this, and it can start to feel clinical, detached. But in the context of this family, the question of why matters deeply to the people who loved them. Because when you knew Melanie, when you watched her show up to the Lucy Project, when you saw how she poured herself into her daughters, when you understood the kind of life she was actively building, the idea that any reason could explain what Ryan Whitten did feels almost impossible to sit with. Investigators did not publicly name a specific motive in the days immediately following the discovery. There was no reported history of domestic violence calls to that address that was made public. There was no prior incident on record that investigators pointed to as a clear warning sign. What they had was a scene, a set of victims, and a perpetrator who had removed himself from the equation before anyone could ask him a single question. That is the part that makes cases like this so difficult to investigate and so difficult to close, emotionally, for everyone involved. When a perpetrator survives, there is a process. There are interviews, court dates, testimony, a public accounting of events. People who love the victims get to sit in a courtroom and watch the person responsible be named, be judged, be held. It is not justice in the truest sense. Nothing brings those people back. But it is something. Ryan Whitten gave nobody that something. Detectives working the case were left to reconstruct a timeline from the physical evidence inside the home, from conversations with people who knew the family, and from whatever records existed that might shed light on the state of the relationship between Ryan and Melanie in the time leading up to that Tuesday night. Whether those conversations revealed anything significant has not been disclosed. What was disclosed, what investigators made clear to the public, is that Ryan Whitten was the one who killed those 3 people. That part was never in question. The physical evidence inside that house told that story without ambiguity. The harder story, the one about what was happening in that household, what Melanie knew or feared or hoped for, what Savannah and Sienna experienced in the days and weeks before they died. That story remains largely untold. And for the people who loved them, that silence is one of the most painful parts of all of this. Virginia Talley, the instructor at the Lucy Project who had worked with Savannah week after week, said she still had not been able to delete the girls from her calendar. That detail is small, and it is enormous, because it tells you everything about the kind of presence these children had in the lives of the people around them. They were not easy to let go of. They were the kind of kids who left a mark, the kind who made you want to show up for them, week after week, because watching them grow felt like a privilege. Melanie had enrolled them in that program because she believed in them, because she wanted more for them, because she was the kind of mother who spent her energy making sure her daughters had every tool they needed to succeed. None of that was enough to protect them from what happened inside their own home. And that is the truth that investigators, loved ones, and the wider community have been sitting with ever since that Tuesday night in Doral.
This was a murder-suicide situation, but the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office now confirming the name of that father who killed his children as well as the mother of those kids. His name is Ryan Whitten. And what's really important here is those victims. They're Savannah, Sienna, and then their mom, Melanie Heyer. I've been speaking with loved ones of them all day long today who say they're not going to be remembering them by their dark end, but rather their bright lives.
I didn't know that they were touching my life the way they did.
Those who knew 8-year-old Sienna and 11-year-old Savannah Whitten remember them like this.
Sienna, use both hands.
They had a wonderful, contagious smile. Sienna was like the Tasmanian devil, like around all the places. Savannah was a ray of sunshine.
So they can't even begin to process how these young girls' lives came to such a violent end.
Really, no child deserves anything like that.
The Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office says Savannah and Sienna were killed by their own father, Ryan Whitten, And they say he also killed their mom, Melanie Heyer, before taking his own life. Their bodies all found in this Doral Isles home Tuesday night, all with stab wounds.
You kind of just think, what could you have done? What signs did you not see?
As friends and investigators now try to figure out what could have led Whitten to commit such heinous acts. Loved ones hold on to their brightest memories of the girls and their mom.
What do you have on?
She fundraised and she brought her energy and a mom that cared.
Heyer was a real estate agent well known for supporting South Florida nonprofits like the Lucy Project that works with kids on literacy. Heyer also enrolled her daughters in the program. Savannah had dyslexia.
Okay, good job.
Their instructor, Virginia Tallier, says these were Savannah's favorites, the spelling tiles.
She got 100% on that spelling test after discovering the tiles. Their future was bright. I'll miss them. I'll miss them very much. I haven't been able to delete them from my calendar for next week.
Was teaching them in all of those weeks. So many people in there are now just devastated by this loss, knowing they're not going to see these girls or their mom again. We just want to remind everybody at home that if you're struggling with your mental health, or if you are a survivor of domestic violence, you're in a situation like that, there are resources to help you. We have a list of those on our website right now, local10.com.
There was no arrest. There was no trial. There was no moment where a judge looked Ryan Whitten in the eye and read out what he had done. No moment where a jury of 12 people sat and weighed the evidence and came back with a verdict that the family could hold on to. No sentencing hearing, no final statement from the man himself, no explanation delivered under oath, on the record, in a room full of people who needed to hear it. Ryan Whitten made sure of that. When he took his own life inside that Doral Isles home, he closed every door that the legal system would have otherwise opened. And in doing so, he left the people who loved Melanie, Savannah, and Sienna with something that is arguably harder to carry than a verdict. He left them with silence. There is something that happens to grief when it has nowhere to go, when there is no trial to prepare for, no court date to mark on the calendar, no process that forces the story into the open and demands that it be told in full. The grief just sits there, heavy and unanswered, and the people holding it have to find a way to carry it without any of the structures that society normally builds around loss like this. The Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office confirmed Ryan Whitten as responsible. That confirmation matters. It means the record is clear. It means nobody spent years wondering who did this, or whether someone else might have been involved. The facts were not in dispute. But a confirmation is not the same as an accounting, and the people who loved this family deserved an accounting. What Melanie Heyer left behind is not small. She left behind a community that knew her name and felt her absence the moment she was gone. She left behind colleagues who remembered her energy. She left behind the staff and children at the Lucy Project, a non-profit she believed in enough to bring her own daughters into. She left behind a real estate career that spoke to her drive, her work ethic, and her investment in the place she called home. And she left behind the memory of 2 little girls who were just getting started. Savannah Whitten was 11 years old and had already overcome something that stops a lot of kids cold. Dyslexia is not a small thing to navigate, and she navigated it with the kind of determination that makes the people around a child stop and take notice. Her instructor said it plainly. Her future was as bright as she was. Those are not throwaway words. That is someone who watched a child work and saw what she was capable of and believed it. Sienna Whitten was 8 years old and apparently incapable of entering a room without making her presence known. The people who described her could not help but smile, even in grief. That is the kind of child she was. The kind whose energy outlasts them. The kind you remember not with sadness first, but with something that feels almost like joy before the sadness catches up. Both of them gone, because of a choice that was not theirs to make. The people who loved Melanie, Savannah, and Sienna made a decision in the days after the discovery. They were not going to let the way these three died become the first thing anyone thought of when they heard their names. They gathered. They talked about the girls' smiles. They talked about Melanie's warmth. They talked about the specific, irreplaceable ways that these three people had moved through their lives and left something good behind. That is an act of resistance, maybe the most humankind there is. Because the truth is, what Ryan Whitten did will always be a part of this story. There is no version of Melanie's life, or Savannah's, or Sienna's, where that Tuesday night does not exist. It happened. It cannot be undone. But the people who knew them are refusing to let it be the whole story. And they are right to refuse. There is a harder conversation that this case demands, and it is one that communities across the country keep having to have, about what happens inside homes that look stable from the outside, about the gap between what a neighborhood sees and what a family actually lives, about the fact that domestic violence does not always announce itself to the people who could intervene. It does not always leave a visible trail. Sometimes it builds in private, in silence, in spaces where no one outside those four walls is ever invited to look, and sometimes by the time anyone looks, it is already too late. Melanie Heyer deserved to grow old. She deserved to watch Savannah conquer every reading challenge that dyslexia ever threw at her. She deserved to watch Sienna, her little Tasmanian devil, figure out who she was going to become. She deserved all of it, and so did her daughters. If you are in a relationship that feels unsafe, if something in your home feels wrong and you cannot name it yet, or you can name it and you are afraid of what happens next, there are people who will listen. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available around the clock. You do not have to have a bruise to call. You do not have to have a police report to call. You just have to make the call. Because the worst thing about cases like this is not just what happened. It is the question of what could have been different, and who might still be here if the answer had found its way to the surface just a little sooner. Rest, Melanie. Rest, Savannah. Rest, Sienna. This story was told with care, because you deserved that much.